This lecture focuses on the 20th century composers John Cage and Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. One concept which will be prevalent in this music that you will hear of these composers is this concept of aleatory music. Alea in Latin meaning dice, meaning that some elements of composition are left to chance. This is music in which elements traditionally determined by composers are determined either by a process of random selection chosen by the composer or by the exercise of choice by the performer. Indeterminacy, which is creating music which is formless without structure, puts a distance between the composer and the work, and the composer writes music not based on determinate relationships. As I said before, these elements will be prevalent in the music of John Cage and Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. Beginning with John Cage, his dates 1912 to 1992. An American composer, born in Los Angeles, died in New York. He attended Pomona College in California for 2 years. He was 6 months in Paris, and then he traveled to Mallorca, Madrid, and Berlin. He worked on poetry, painting, and early attempts at writing music. He was a gardener and lectured to housewives about modern painting and music, as well as being a dance accompanist. He was married and divorced, and Merce Cunningham, a choreographer, became his partner as well as his dance collaborator. You will see a part of his dance collaboration with Merce Cunningham in his Roratorio, which is based on the words of James Joyce of Finnegan's Wake. This was a work done in 1979. The collaboration of dance and music is based on rhythmic structure point. Cage also studied with Schoenberg, who agreed to teach him for free when Cage promised Schoenberg to dedicate his life to music. He also used Zen Buddhism and the I Ching as influences that clarified his life, as well as being a part of his creative process. And you are going to hear several examples of this. One example is the very famous chants music of 4 minutes and 33 seconds, which is a work that includes written instructions. It was composed in 1952. And what happens is, as you will see in the YouTube production, that the pianist sits at the piano and then sits at the piano and just waits for you just to hear everything that's happening around as he sits at the piano. Maybe the only motion being the lid going, rising and falling. The other is the Imaginary Landscape number 4 in 1951. This used 12 radio receivers tuned to certain stations for precise amounts of time. 24 performers were involved, and the score included tuning and the volume of each of the radios. Again, very much of an example of chants music, of what you would hear and what would actually take place. His concept of prepared piano came from working with dance classes in African dance. Since Cage only had room for a piano and not for drums or any other instruments, he used nuts and bolts in the piano for percussive effects. His first work was Bacchanal in 1938 to 1940. But note, when you actually see the performances of these pieces, that Cage is still playing the keyboard after he has prepared the inside of the piano. This is important because you're going to notice that when we talk about George Crumb, he will actually play inside the piano as well as prepare the piano. The other work that I would like you to actually see, and there is also a person that's talking about how to create the nuts and bolts inside the piano is the very famous Sonata and Interludes, a work that was composed by Cage 1946 to 1948. It is important to hear Cage speak about his life, influences, and creative processes in order to be able to understand his works. So I have included Cage interviews as well as his writings. The other composer is Karl Heinz Stockhausen, 1928 to 2007, a German composer. He studied at the University of Cologne, Germany, and also studied with the famous composer Messiaen. He credited the Nazis for his hatred of rhythmic normalcy due to the repetition of simple melodic songs on Nazi public radio. He studied oboe, violin, and piano. And he worked at WDR, which was the West German radio. Stockhausen was very influenced by his Catholicism. He prayed a lot. And he said, and I quote, "Confession is like practicing music. You have to practice it again and again." His works include experiments of serial music, chance music, electronic music, spiritual music. Stravinsky panned his debut on a public radio broadcast. He blasted Stockhausen for trying to advance music without first embracing music's origins and traditions. But believe it or not, that negative publicity got Stockhausen his first commission. The musical examples I have included for Stockhausen are the Klavierstück 11, which is a great example of chance music. Includes instructions on the back, and it's this huge score, meaning that on this huge piece of paper, there are segments of this piece. It is up to the performer to order the segments of the piece, and that's how the piece is ordered. So that means every time you can play it differently because of the ordered segments. What's interesting is each segment, though, is very meticulously tailored so that you know what's happening within the segment, how you're going to end the segment dynamically, or what kind of a fermata you're going to use on certain notes. So everything is very, very structured in that way, but it's the order that the pianist uses that is the chance element. Because of this, it becomes a huge score, and it has to be hung up on the lid of the piano when it's performed. The other work, which is a very interesting work, and you'll get a big charge out of, is the Helicopter Quartet. It also comes with instructions. 1995 is when it was created. It is actually made up of a string quartet, 4 helicopters, audio and video equipment, and technicians, as well as a TV transmitter. An auditorium is involved, 4 columns of TVs and speakers. And you can actually see into and through the transparent helicopters. So I did give you a YouTube version of the Helicopter Quartet. As for his electronic music, or musique concrète, which are recording acoustical sounds, a great example of this is the Kontakte, which means contacts. It's 36 minutes long. It was created in 1958, from 1958 to 1960. It's for electronic sounds, piano, and percussion. It's basically contacts between the instrumental and electronic sound groups. There is a use of 4-channel loudspeaker reproduction, contacts between the various forms of spatial movement. I have also included a Stockhausen interview where he actually speaks about this work. These 2 composers are very innovative. I think that you'll find the examples to be quite experimental, but at the same time quite fun to watch.